Hoje de manhã, o professor Harari falou uma das coisas brilhantes que sempre me desperta atenção, mas nesse caso ele comentou o seguinte: ele diz que o que ele faz, o que o traz aqui para conversar com vocês, o que o faz escrever os livros, é uma missão que ele absorveu, é uma missão que ele acha que tem, que lhe incumbiu, que é o de fazer uma ponte entre o conhecimento, a ciência e as pessoas. Ele acha que ele está contribuindo para levar o conhecimento às pessoas, para que isso tenha um poder transformador nelas, melhore a vida delas, melhore a vida de todo mundo. Eu fiquei pensando que isso é uma grande metáfora muito válida também para o que nós, curadores, estamos fazendo e o que o LER faz. Só que talvez a LER não seja bem uma ponte, nós somos mais para uma rede, nós somos uma série infindável de pontos, de pessoas, de amigos, de parceiros, colaboradores que estão contribuindo. Temos os curadores, eu estou aqui meramente representando os curadores, além de todos esses que foram mencionados, também temos o Tom Farias, temos gente que contribui com a sua sugestão. Então, é o tempo todo, o ano inteiro, gente de olho, e o que está surgindo de expressão, o que está surgindo de novidade, como é que a gente pode trazer, valorizar essa voz. A LER tem um compromisso muito grande de trazer a diversidade, a variedade, o acolhimento. Nós queremos falar para todo mundo, queremos que todo mundo fale. Nessa rede que eu me incluí, modestamente, inclui todos nós temos todos esses autores também, que vão desde autores consagrados, aos quais nós estamos homenageando. Então, queria lembrar aqui nossos homenageados, Luiz Fernando Veríssimos, o Eni Ventura e Elza Soares. E também estão incluídos nessa rede os leitores jovens, as crianças que arregalam os olhos quando encontram o livro pela primeira vez, os jovens autores que estão querendo chegar. São curadores, montadores, jornalistas, escritores, editores, livreiros, e tem uma seção muito importante desse ponto, fundamental, que são os professores. São eles que fazem esse papel cotidianamente, com muito sacrifício, de fazer a ponte entre o conhecimento, a cultura e as pessoas. Eu sei que aqui na plateia tem muitos professores, eu queria pedir uma saudação para eles, que merecem. Eu queria também trazer uma boa novidade a ler nessa generosidade imensa que é de toda a equipe, e também do nosso idealizador e concretizador, Jerônimo Vargas, um cara que não só sonha grande, mas faz grande, que é o mais difícil, e que ele acaba sendo a grande força nessa rede. Tem algumas novidades. Depois da LER, nós vamos ter uma atividade muito especial aos professores. Nós vamos ter 3 dias de extensão da LER, onde nós vamos fazer um conteúdo agora dirigido para professores, para estimular, para inspirar, para recuperar aquela energia que o professor gasta ao longo de todo o ano, o professor saber mais, aprender mais, conversar com outros professores, conversar com gente que ajuda. Vai se chamar Caleidoscópio da Leitura, vai acontecer do dia 26 ao dia 29 na LER, 26 a 29, na própria LER, no campo de Santana. Vamos ter escritores, autores, personagens, livros, para tratar e dar força e reconhecer o trabalho fundamental desses profissionais. Entre os professores, eu também queria destacar alguns que eu acho que estão aqui, que são os pesquisadores, os graduandos, os mestrandos, no Departamento de Antropologia do Museu Nacional, da UFRJ. Como vocês sabem, nós perdemos... Isso, inclusive, foi uma coisa que sensibilizou muito o professor Harari vir aqui, poder falar com essa equipe tão nobre. Nós queremos também dar uma boa notícia, uma ótima notícia, dentro desse espírito da LER, de entregar a cidade, recuperar a cidade, ativar a cidade através da cultura. Nós temos uma meta ambiciosa ano que vem, de levar a LER, que começou no Porto, veio para a Biblioteca Parque, Campo de Santana. Em 2020, a LER vai estar na Quinta da Boa Vista, abraçando o Museu Nacional e ajudando na reabertura desse tesouro de todos os brasileiros. Então, eu acho que não tem uma maneira melhor da gente começar a ler 2019 com todos vocês, com essa grande energia, todo mundo sentado aqui para aprender mutuamente, para aprender um pouco com o professor Harari, para poder discutir ideias, discutir a nossa própria humanidade. Então, para dar a partida no primeiríssimo e especialíssimo evento da LER 2019, eu queria primeiro chamar o Ronaldo Lemos, que é um dos grandes divulgadores e trabalhadores da obra do Harari aqui no Brasil. O Ronaldo, ele é advogado, ele é especialista em tecnologia, sociedade, ele é mestre em Direito, por Harvard, Columbia, e vocês talvez conheçam ele, devem conhecer ele pela televisão, ele tem o Expresso Futuro no Globo News e no Fantástico, e eu vou ter que continuar falando com vocês enquanto o Ronaldo não vem, mas isso é um grande prazer. Eu quero reforçar que todo mundo está convidadíssimo. Ronaldo Lemos, boa noite, espero todo mundo na LER no dia 20 a 24. Muito obrigado. Obrigado, Ronaldo. Pode ter microfone.
Vamos aqui. Boa noite, gente. Tudo bem? Estão animados para conversar com o Harari? A gente também está. A gente já estava falando ali nos bastidores e a conversa vai prometer muito. Acho que todo mundo está familiarizado, né, com a obra dele, mas eu acho que não custa fazer uma brevíssima introdução de que Harari é hoje um dos pensadores que trata de complexidade, né? A gente está vivendo num mundo cada vez mais complexo e ele busca dar conta dessa complexidade de uma forma, inclusive, que toca muita gente, né? Os livros dele venderam milhões de exemplares em todo o mundo e ele é um historiador que tem uma característica diferente. É um historiador que olha não só para o passado, mas ele olha também para o presente e para o futuro. Ele até gosta de dizer que a tarefa do historiador é, na verdade, de estudar os processos de mudança. E eu acho que ele faz isso muito bem nos livros dele. Então, para a gente ter essa conversa hoje, eu gostaria, em primeiro lugar, de chamar a Adriana Carranca, que é jornalista, escritora, e ela cobriu, inclusive, diversos conflitos importantes no mundo de hoje, Síria e Iraque, e autora do livro Malala, a menina que queria ir para a escola. Adriana, muito obrigado. E, segundo lugar, mas não menos importante, e é o momento que a gente está esperando hoje, eu queria convidar ao palco o professor Yuval Noah Harari, que é historiador, filósofo, autor de Sapiens, Homo, Deus e 21 propostas para o novo milênio. Vamos lá.
Bom, boa noite a todos. Eu fui incumbida dessa tarefa dificílima, desse grande desafio de entrevistar o Harari, né, que é essa pessoa tão admirável. Eu agradeço muito a presença de todos vocês e muito a presença de Harari aqui e a oportunidade da gente ter essa conversa e poder aprender mais, né, com você, além dos livros, o tanto que você já contribuiu com o nosso conhecimento através dos livros. Então, a gente combinou de conversar em inglês, porque é mais fácil para ele. Vocês estão com a tradução de qualquer forma. Quem não fala, a gente tem uma meia hora, né, para conversar. E depois a gente abre para a pergunta do público, que foi muito generosamente um pedido do próprio Harari, que queria ouvir as perguntas de vocês. E a gente agradece muito por isso também. Então, let's begin from the start, as we say. Sapiens, a short story of humankind, more than 1 million copies sold, translated to more than 30 languages. Mark Zuckerberg added this to its book club. President Barack Obama recommended your book. It was a huge success. It takes us through this fascinating journey of our civilization very successfully in 500 pages. How did that idea started in your mind? What was the seed of that idea? Why to write a book about humankind now. And why do you think, of course, besides the fact that you were extremely talented storyteller, page turner, yes, as we say, and even with it's a heavy historical research, and it's so easy to read and so fascinating. Besides that, why do you think people were so eager to learn about that journey? Had we neglected our own history until now?
Well, first, thank you very much for welcoming me here. It's a pleasure to be here in Rio, in Brazil. And as for your question, the idea actually came from an interaction between me and my students in the Hebrew University, that I was giving a course at the university, and I was witnessing the eagerness and enthusiasm of the students, and that's what gave me the idea that maybe these things are relevant not just to this group of students, but there will be other audiences for this kind of new history of humankind. And I think that the demand really comes all over the world from the fact that we are living in a global world in which the life of individual people are influenced constantly by events on the other side of the world. If there is a new president in the US, or if there is an economic crisis in China, it immediately influences your life here. And looking to the future, this will probably only accelerate. We are about to make the most important decisions in the history of humankind. And to make good decisions, we need a global perspective, not the perspective of a single nation or a single corporation. And unfortunately, in most of the world, the educational systems are still overwhelmingly focused on teaching local or national history. I'm not sure about Brazil, I didn't do any research, but in Israel and in many other countries, I know that, like in Israel, they teach mainly Israeli history and Jewish history. And it's good, it's important to know the history of your country, your people, but it's not enough in the 21st century. And I think, therefore, there was a real need for such a story which takes the global perspective about what happened in the last thousands of years.
Yeah, it's interesting. That brings us to the next question, which is you explore a lot in your book, in your books about nationalism, and at some point you do talk about the positive side of nationalism and how it helped people to collaborate with each other to build societies. But there is also a threat on that, as you said. We need today global solutions. We have global problems that require global solutions. Why do you think that there was this re-emergence of nationalism and even ultra-nationalism recently, when we are becoming more, especially in that era where we are becoming more global and the world is more connected and globalization is a reality, why we were going back to nationalism, and what is the positive, if there is any positive thing on going back to that, and the negative and the threat of ultranationalism?
Well, first we need to realize that nationalism has been a positive force in history. It's not only bad. The basic idea of nationalism is to make people care about strangers that they don't know. I mean, as against ancient tribes, hunter-gatherer tribes, tens of thousands of years ago, where everybody knows everybody else, in a nation, a big nation like Brazil or even like Israel, there are 8 million Israelis. I don't know 99% of them. Nationalism, the secret of nationalism is to make people care about strangers, care enough, for example, to pay taxes so that people in a distant city, which I never met, will have good healthcare and education. And that's the positive side of nationalism. The negative side of nationalism is that when it incites hatred and not love. And we are seeing it today, and we need to remind people that the true essence of nationalism is not hating foreigners, Rather, it's loving your compatriots. That's what nationalism is about. So if you want to prove your patriotism, don't start wars or persecute minorities. That's not nationalism. Pay your taxes honestly. Appoint, if you're like, I don't know, a government official, then appoint the most qualified person to the job and not your cousin or your brother. That's also a sign of a good nationalist. And this kind of nationalism has absolutely nothing against global cooperation.
That's interesting.
The key thing is really to protect your fellow citizens, your compatriots. And in the 21st century, the only way to really protect your compatriots from poverty, from climate change, from nuclear war, from the dangers of disruptive technologies is by cooperating with many other countries. No country by itself can stop global warming, and no country by itself can regulate artificial intelligence. So I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with nationalism, although there is a contradiction between nationalism and globalism. Mm-hmm. We are seeing now a rise, I would say, not even of nationalism, but many of the leaders who depict themselves as nationalists, they are misusing the word. They are actually anti-nationalist. Mm-hmm. A nationalist leader is somebody who cares about the whole nation and tries to unite the nation. And we are seeing now in many parts of the world, like in the US, the rise of leaders who, for one reason or another, intentionally divide the nation, intentionally try to destroy the national community by using very inflammatory language and divisive policies. We can argue about why they do it, what benefit do they have from dividing the nation, but one thing should be very clear, they are not nationalists.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you... brought me to two other questions. I want to touch immigration, that we were talking about this behind the stage. Before I will go back to that, but you touched also in another very important area that is in your first book, Sapiens, which is the cognitive revolution and the power of narrative. You talk in your book, you talk about you frame our journey, the journey of humankind, within three great revolutions. One is the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the scientific revolution. As a storyteller myself, I was very touched and impacted me a lot when I read about the cognitive revolution and the power. You said that we don't, opposing to what most of us think, we don't think in numbers and statistics as much as we understand the storytelling and narrative. And you were just talking about how these new leaders are building a narrative that it's not even accurate about nationalism and dividing countries, dividing people. Can you talk about the power of narrative then, and in that time of that revolution, what changed in us, the course of humanity, and now, how it's changing us?
Yeah, I mean, when we try to understand why our species, Homo sapiens, controls the world, we like to believe that there is something special about each one of us individually. Mm-hmm. That as an individual, I'm far superior to a chimpanzee or to a dog or to a horse, and this is why me and creatures like me, humans, why we control the world. But this is just wishful thinking. This is just, self-flattery. On the individual level, I'm not superior to a chimpanzee at all. What makes us really superior to chimpanzees, is that we can, for example, gather in places like this, there are like 2,000 people here, try to cram 2,000 chimpanzees into a place like this, and bring some chimpanzee from thousands of kilometers away to tell them about, I don't know what, it won't work. you'll have complete chaos here. So the key to our control of the world is the ability to cooperate in large numbers. 2,000 people is really nothing. I mean, today we know how to cooperate, at least in the economic field, on the level of billions. We now have a trade network encompassing the entire world, almost 8 billion people cooperating. Chimpanzees can cooperate at most 100 or something like that. And then the question is, what enables us to create these amazing systems of cooperation? And the answer is always the same, storytelling. Because every large-scale human cooperation is based on common stories that we create and spread around. And as long as everybody believes in the same story, everybody follows the same rules and norms, and you can cooperate. So, you know, the obvious cases are things like religions and ideologies. But maybe the most interesting case, again, is the global trade network, that our modern economy is also based on stories. I think the greatest storytellers in the world are not the ones who win the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Literature Prize, are the ones that win the Nobel Economic Prize. They tell far more effective and convincing stories.
And we keep believing.
And we keep believing. You know, and then you think about the simple thing like money,
right?
That it's just a story.
It's just a paper.
Today it's not even paper. 90-something% of the money in the world is just electronic data.
Right.
Like you work very, very hard the whole month, and what do you get after the whole month? Somebody passes some data from one computer file to another computer file, and you open your bank account and you see, I have $1,000 or something, and you believe that. And it works. And it works because not only you believe that, everybody else also believes that. Yeah. So you go to the supermarket and you want to buy bread, and the cashier at the supermarket also believes that. So it's, as long as everybody believes it, it works. There are cases in history, famous cases, like next door in Argentina, there was a case a couple of years ago, when suddenly people stop believing. And then everything collapses.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Yeah. Because I think like one of the issues that we live in this globalized world is that the control of the narratives has been really decentralized, right? Because of the emergence of the internet, there's a lot of people that can step into the public discourse and actually start telling stories that often are not true. And a lot of people believe them. So I always like to say that a poll institute in Brazil, Datafolha, asked Brazilians whether they think the earth is flat or round. And 7% of Brazilians think the earth is flat. And 4% are not sure. So they're actually thinking about it. So if the earth is flat or round, it has certain consequences. But when you do that with vaccines, you lead people, for instance, to stop vaccinating their children and diseases like smallpox, sarampo returning. What should we do when the stories become untrustable, unreliable, and, you know, being capable of being manipulated?
Well, that's a very old story. I mean, fake news is not something new. We've had it even worse in previous times. If you go back a couple of 100 years, then many more people think the world is flat and believe all kinds of other strange things. And the thing is that it's often easier to convince people of a fictional story than of reality, because reality tends to be far more complicated than fiction. And also, reality is often unpleasant and inconvenient, whereas the fictional stories can be created to be very flattering to people. So throughout history, it's not the case that truth necessarily defeats fiction. Very often we see the opposite. Again, the power of humanity comes from cooperation, and in many cases, it's easier to make people cooperate through a fictional story than by telling them something like E = mc². Not a lot of people. You can't build a religion or an ideology or a nation by telling people that E equals MC square, even if it's true. Just understanding what it means is so difficult. So this problem is not new. And, you know, I talked about religion, but even religious people will agree that all religions, except one, are fake news. The exception is, of course, my religion. So, you know, you go to a Jew, you say, yes, Judaism is true. But Christianity, all these stories about Jesus being the Son of God and raising people from the dead, fake news. You go to the Christian, you will say, no, that's true. But all these stories of the Muslims about Muhammad and so forth, that's fake news, and so forth. So it's not something new, this issue. What is new is now it's true that today everybody can tell their story. With Instagram, with YouTube, it's easier than ever to tell your story, but it's harder than ever to get an audience.
Yes.
And the thing is, it's not about telling the story, it's about convincing people. And there is a huge, because so many people are telling stories, there is a huge battle for attention. Previously, the huge battle was for the resources to actually tell the story, like to print books. It was expensive, it was difficult. Only a few people had access to the printing technology. So this was the major struggle. Now it's very easy to tell the story and to spread it all over the world, but how do you grab the attention of people? How does your story attract and not the millions of other stories? And here, unfortunately, the easiest way to grab people's attention is by pressing their emotional buttons.
Yeah. Yes.
Fear and hate and anger. Again, think about the politicians you most dislike, and you see, you surf the internet, you see some maybe fake news story that this politician said something or did something terrible. You have an irresistible urge to click on that.
Maybe send it to someone else.
And send it to someone else, yes.
Yeah.
And over the last years, we have some of the smartest people in the world really hacking human beings and hacking the human brain and understanding how to do that more and more efficiently. At first, they did it to sell us stuff that we don't need. But then it got into the political realm, and now they also can sell us politicians we don't need.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You also said that human feelings are the source of all authority in the world, and that's related to what you were talking about now. Democracy is about human feelings, so because people decide based on their feelings. And you just mentioned how for many, many years, the corporations used human feelings to sell us things, and now they seem to have realized recently that these consumers are enough of a big public to elect politicians as well. Is that the case that you know, big data and social networks that allows anyone to access our feelings? Our feelings are there, right? On social networks, we take pictures, we publish when we are happy, what makes us happy, and so our feelings are now being collected much more easy, in a much more easy way, in big datas, and so they understand better and they can manipulate our feelings. It's not only about understanding, it's also about manipulating, is it?
Once you understand, you can manipulate. Once you have a good understanding of the human emotional system, it becomes much easier to manipulate it. And, you know, again, going back to politics, politicians are like musicians, but the instrument they play on is the human emotional system, not the piano. And they are experts in how to, they press a button, they tweet, and there is a wave of fear, or there is a wave of anger. And this is not new. this was always the case in politics, going back thousands of years, that one of the arts of politics is how to control and manipulate the emotions of the public.
But in a much bigger scale now.
Now you have better and better technology of how to do it in a sophisticated way. And that's one of the dangers we are facing. We really haven't seen anything yet. Because what we've been seeing in recent years is big data collected mainly about where we go, who we meet, what we click. It's all external to the body. They try to understand what's happening in our brain, in our mind, but through external signals.
Right.
Like I watched this YouTube video, it probably means that I'm X. The real revolution, which is just around the corner, is when you combine information technology with biotechnology and really is able to get into people's minds directly. And this is, it will come in the next few years. Already today we have the technology to identify human emotions non-intrusively just by looking at their faces. I mean, basically this is what I do. If I want to understand your emotions now, then I look at your face, I learn from experience that the small differences in facial feature between an angry face, a bored face, a sad face, and I learn to recognize it. And the same with voice, the tone of voice. And now computers are becoming even better than humans in recognizing these signals. But computers will soon be able to do much more, which I can't, look directly to your heart and to your brain. What's your heartbeat right now? Which areas of your brain are now working? I deduce it in an indirect way. Again, if you're smiling or crying or whatever. But very soon we'll have ubiquitous biometric sensors that can tell you or tell a corporation or tell the government which areas of the brain are now working. So at least in some regimes, this could lead to the worst totalitarian regimes that ever existed. Something even beyond what George Orwell imagined in 1984, or what we saw in places like the USSR. We could have regimes that can know 24 hours what every citizen not only does and says, but also feels.
And you also...
Can I ask a counterpoint and a follow-up on that? In your books, you warn a lot about big data and the dangers of superconnectivity, surveillance, and so on. The problem is that, like, living in the developing world, sometimes the problem is not big data, but is actually no data. So I'll give you a few examples. Like in Brazil, you have 3 million people that don't even have a birth certificate. They are completely off the grid. You have like at least 2,000 localities in Brazil with no cell phone signal. And there is about 54% of the population without connection to broadband. So it's interesting because I understand the dangers, but what should we do in terms of public policy? Should we say, let's keep them like that because they will be safe from very bad things that are going to happen? Or maybe we should say, let's connect them and maybe teach them right away how to disconnect after that. What should we do?
No, I don't think we should be afraid of technology. I think that, yes, people need birth certificates and they need connectivity and they need cellular reception. It's very important. So I'm not against the technology. Every technology can be used for good purposes, for bad purposes. And the key point is not to say, oh, technology is frightening, let's stop the development. But yeah, we need to develop, but we need to develop in a wise way that benefits people. Yeah, I'll give an example from my own history, my own personal life. So I met my husband online 17 years ago in one of the first gay dating sites that came up on the internet in Israel. It was 2002. And this was wonderful. I was then living in a small Israeli, quite homophobic town. And where do you meet guys? I mean, there are no gay bars and you can't just go to somebody on the street, so what do you do? And then the internet came, and it was wonderful that this technology, especially for a lot of disenfranchised and disempowered communities like the LGBT community, it gave very powerful tools. Suddenly, it's very different, you know, every group of people. Traditionally, I'm also Jewish, so Jews have a long, long history of persecution. But at least one thing was always going for you, that as a Jewish boy, you were born into a Jewish family. Very few Jewish boys were born to Christian families. So at least when you grow up, your parents are Jewish, your siblings are Jewish, you know a lot of Jewish people, you have this support network. But as a gay boy, you're not born to a gay family. Usually. Today, sometimes yes, but most of the time, no. And so one of the big difficulties is you feel completely alone in the world. And this was the 1980s, 1990s, with far fewer information. And so the internet in this sense was wonderful. I don't want to go back and let's abolish the internet. But then you also have to be aware of the dangers. Again, staying with the same example, in a place like Iran, when there is the death penalty for homosexuality, today with the new technology, the regime can far more easily identify gay men than ever before in history. Very soon might be able to identify them before they identify themselves. Just by, you know, when you're just growing up, there are all kinds of signals that an algorithm that watches you all the time can pick up the signs before you pick them up. And that's extremely dangerous. So the answer is not, let's go back to the Stone Age, especially as it's not going to happen. It's let's develop technology in a smart way, in a wise way, aware of the dangers, and the key is not in the technology, it's in the political system. Every technology can be used for bad or for good. The issue is not the technology, but what kind of political and social system we build to make sure that the technology is used for good.
One danger, as you mentioned, is the fact that we are becoming, as you described, masses of dispossessed and an elite with access to technology, because the world is also enormously unequal. If we continue in that path, what's going to happen if that inequality in the access, as he was mentioning, the access to technology, what's going to happen?
Again, the biggest danger is that the enormous power and wealth that the new technology generates will be monopolized either by a few states, a few countries, or by a small elite in each country, or in several countries. So on the level of the country, to give again a concrete example, today, let's say in Rio, you have tens of thousands, maybe more, of taxi drivers and bus drivers and truck drivers, and each of them commands a small part of the transportation market. They get a small part of the profits of the transportation system. They also have political power because they can unionize, and if the rights are violated, if the government does something they don't like, they can go on strike, and that's political power. Now, fast forward 20 years, let's say all of that is replaced by self-driving vehicles. So potentially, all the wealth and power is now not shared between tens of thousands of human drivers. It all belongs to a few billionaires, maybe one billionaire, who controls the corporation, who owns the algorithms that drive all the vehicles. Think Uber without human drivers. So again, it's not inevitable. It depends on policies that we adopt. We can prevent it from happening. Same thing on the global, on the international level. We are now in the midst of an AI race between a few countries. The leaders of the race are the USA and China. A A few other countries have joined the race, but the vast majority of countries are far, far behind. If we aren't careful, again, the result will be that most of the benefits of the automation revolution will be monopolized by these few countries, and the rest of the world will be like the 19th century Industrial Revolution, when the few countries that led the Industrial Revolution, like Britain and France and Japan, they basically colonized and dominated the entire world. So this could happen again with AI, both economically, but also politically. At present, data is being harvested all over the world and concentrated in just a few hubs, especially in China and the US. Just think what Brazilian politics would be like in 20 or 30 years when the entire personal and medical and sexual history of every journalist and every politician and every judge is in the hands of somebody in Beijing or in San Francisco. So theoretically, it's still an independent country, but practically, it's a kind of data colony. You don't need to send soldiers in if you have so much data about people. Again, it's not inevitable, it's not a prophecy, it's a danger, and whether it is realized or not depends on the actions and policies that we adopt in the coming years.
Another danger.
Just very quickly follow up. It's interesting because this is one of the three problems you describe as global problems, right? The risk of nuclear wars, global warming, and the threat of technology and data. The problem with data is AI is becoming a sort of arms race, and as you describe, the US and China are leading. But in order to have good AI and to participate in this race, you need good education, right? So I like to say also that I was in China until last Monday. I'm still confused with the time zones, have to say. But I was looking at the PISA results. PISA is a sort of a global vestibular, a test that allows you to compare scores between students from different countries. The 10% worst students in China are equal to the 10% best students in Brazil. And of course, that China is now posing itself as a leader for AI, and they have developers and engineers, and that's going to help them a lot. So what should countries that are, you know, in the poorest areas in the developing world do to be prepared for that? Can we aspire to innovate as well and be part of this game? Or what are the alternatives?
I think there are three main things that can be done. I mean, you can try and join the race. The thing about AI, that it's based mainly on data and human capital. You don't need very heavy investment in physical infrastructure. If you go to Silicon Valley, it's amazing how bad the physical, all the bridges are collapsing, all the roads are cracking. So it's not physical infrastructure, it's really cultural infrastructure and legal infrastructure. You need local human capital and to attract human capital from abroad, and that can be done. And we have seen some very small countries, not just my home country of Israel, but Estonia is another good example, an ex-Soviet republic that has managed to become not a leading player, but a significant player, certainly for its size. So that's the first thing, that don't think it's impossible to join the race. It's difficult, but possible, and it's important. The second thing is to collaborate with other countries. Brazil by itself, even though it's a large and powerful country, will have difficulty negotiating or blocking China or the US or the huge tech companies like Google or Baidu or Tencent or Amazon. But if Brazil joins other countries, creates a South American bloc, or joins forces with other countries in Africa, in Asia, in Indonesia, India, then it's much easier. You have a much stronger position to negotiate a good deal, either with the Chinese government or with Baidu or with Google. For instance, a deal about protecting data and a deal about sharing the profits. A lot of the developments in places like Silicon Valley or China are partly the result of data gathered here. So that it's a bit like colonialism in the 19th century, that the raw material, which is now data, not sugar or cotton, is taken from the data colony and is transferred to the home country. There the really expensive technology is being developed, and then it's sold back. So it's now happening with information technology and data. And a group of countries like that can try and negotiate to get something for all the data they are providing. The third thing that can be done is it will be very difficult to compete with the front runners in the niches they already occupy. Like if you try to create the Brazilian Google, it probably won't work.
Too late.
Too late.
Maybe if you have done it before, yes. Now it's very hard.
So the key is to identify niches that for various reasons are still open. Now, and there are many niches because the model in the US is of becoming one of surveillance capitalism. In China, it's more of a model of authoritarian surveillance. There is a large room for very different kinds of technologies that, for example, oppose surveillance, protect individuals. Or a different example is most of the AI systems now being developed, they monitor and analyze individuals in the service of corporations and governments. But there is a huge need for the opposite kind of systems that monitor governments in the service of individuals.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is something that both the Chinese and the Americans are not very keen on developing. But if you develop that, the huge market for it. So it sounds abstract, so I'll give an example. Like, what does it mean for the individual to monitor the government? So, corruption is a huge issue all over the world. We now have a big scandal also in Israel about it. Mm-hmm. And many people would like to have an AI system that monitors government corruption. For example, all the issue of appointing your relatives, even if they are not the best candidates for the job, for various...
We're very familiar with that.
We are also familiar with that. For me as a private citizen, to monitor that is very difficult. Because even if there is freedom of information, I can get the files, to go over all the appointments in the government and to know who is related to whom, I don't have the time. But it should be technically very easy to build an AI system that does it for us. The information is there, the family relations, it's not so difficult to know that. It's also public knowledge. So maybe you have an AI tool that you enter your computer, your smartphone, you enter the name of a politician, and within 2 seconds, the AI tells you how many of his or her relatives were appointed to government positions in the last year.
Very good.
A lot of people around the world will be happy to buy such a technology.
Yeah.
The threat, I was going to mention another threat that you discuss in your book, which is very scary, which is how we are developing technology and biometrics and artificial intelligence to the point that machines might become smarter than us and replace our species. Is that real? Is that happening? Is that you truly foreseen this happening?
I think replacing our species is a faraway science fiction scenario. And also becoming smarter than us in general, it's very unlikely in the near future. But in specific areas, yes. There are many areas in which machines are already smarter than us.
For example?
From chess and various games, and we'll see more and more in diagnosing disease, in what I mentioned earlier, recognizing human emotions by listening to the tone of voice. This is something that is currently being automated, and we are really on the verge when, it's emotions. It's not playing chess. Mm-hmm. And very soon machines will be better at recognizing human emotions. Now, this has a huge impact on many professions. Think about lawyers that negotiate, and they try to understand whether the other side is bluffing or not, whether the other side is honest, whether the other side is afraid. This is very important as a lawyer. Very soon, an algorithm will be better than most lawyers in recognizing the emotion of the other side. So you will enter a room, and maybe there are two humans sitting, but there is something in your ear which whispers to you, she's frightened, or something.
Never play poker with the computer then,
exactly.
Right? Okay.
Like poker is over. Like once you have that, it will be very, very difficult. And in so many other professions, this will become critical. And what we will see is not that, a robot rebellion against us. Robots are very unlikely, or computers are very unlikely to develop feelings of their own and consciousness and say, hey, let's take over the world. Actually, the problem with robots is going to be the exact opposite, that they never rebel. Like if you think about political and military situations. So in revolutions, often you have the key moment, I don't know, like in Egypt in 2011, as far as I remember, when the regime would like the soldiers to shoot the demonstrators, but because it's human soldiers, the regime doesn't know, will they shoot or not? And sometimes they shoot, like in Syria, sometimes they don't. With robots, you don't have any problem. They never rebel. You tell them to shoot all the demonstrators, they will shoot all the demonstrators. They don't care, because they have no emotions. They can recognize emotions, but they have no emotions of their own. So what we are likely to see is not the complete replacement of humans, but in more and more areas, authority will shift from humans to algorithms, to computers.
We are seeing that
it's
in
beginning
some areas
in many areas, like, I don't know, you apply to the bank to get a loan. So increasingly, at least in some countries, it's an algorithm taking the decision, not a human, because the algorithm can go over an enormous amount of data very quickly that a human cannot. And it has also a good side. Humans often have biases, and you can, if you program the machine correctly, then you can get rid of some of these biases. Machines, computers can take into account many more indicators. So in humans, often if you don't have a credit history of your own, then the humans say, hi, how can I know if you're credit worthy? But with computer algorithms, you can rely on a lot of other pieces of data. But the end result is that important decisions about your life are shifting from a human to an algorithm. We might reach a point when most decisions about us are taken by an algorithm, whether to give us a loan, whether to accept us to school, whether to accept us for a job, and even on the collective level, like whether to raise the interest rate of the central bank or not. It won't be human, it will be an algorithm making this decision. And whenever people ask, why didn't you accept me for a job? What's wrong with me? The company will say, we don't know. The computer said no. The algorithm said no, and we trust our algorithm.
And it's self-feeding because
and then we are still here, but we might be losing control of our lives, and it's very difficult to deal with it. The European Union has recently passed regulations about data and algorithms and so forth, and one of the regulations is that people should have the right to an explanation. If the bank decided not to give you a loan, then you have the right to ask the bank why not, and the bank cannot say the algorithm said no. They need to explain. But the problem is that computers take decisions in a very different way than humans, and the explanation won't necessarily be helpful. Humans usually make a decision based on only 3-4 salient major factors. Like you meet the human banker, so the human mind works in such a way that we usually take into account a very small number of factors, like your credit history, and if you have biases, then maybe your gender or your race, and makes a decision. An algorithm makes a decision in a completely different way. It takes into account thousands of factors. Each one gets only a very small weight. Like in some cases, the day on which you ask for a loan is a tiny indicator of the chances you will repay the loan, because going over past statistics of millions of people, for some reason, which we can debate, people who ask for a loan on Monday, just after the weekend, are less trustworthy than people who ask for a loan on Wednesday. Now, it's not a big thing. It's, I don't know, like 0.7% but so you ask, when you ask the bank, why didn't you give me a loan? The bank will give you like 1,000 pages of statistical data, and what do you do with it?
I like very much this comment, because these statistics are actually very funny. So there is a one that basically says that people that write in forms in capital letters don't pay their loans well. Or like judges
Send emails in capital letters, vote, very weird.
Yeah, and judges who decide after lunch tend to protect the defendant, you know. They say, oh, the defendant, oh, of course he's innocent, of course, let him go, you know. So that happens a lot. And I would like to explore this algorithm issue, because in your book, Homo Deus, you basically say that it's possible to crack the human code, right? That humans behave like algorithms as well. And because of technology and data, you can actually predict how people will behave, but not only predict, you can actually control the people and how they would behave. So my question is that right? And isn't there an element of incommensurability in the human dimension? Aren't we all political animals, like someone said a long time ago, and that political animality, wouldn't it bring a sort of unpredictability? So I wonder whether it's actually possible to crack the human code because of that.
It's not a question of black and white, possible, not possible. It's a question of how much. It will never be possible to crack anything completely, not a human, not an animal. You cannot predict anything with 100% certainty. Going to the deepest level of the natural world, there is a very strong element of randomness in nature, at least on the quantum level. Yeah. And therefore, no matter how much computing power and how much data you have, you will never be able to predict the actions of a single person or entire population with 100% certainty. But you don't need that. For the kind of changes we are talking about, the algorithms don't need to be perfect. They just need to be better than the average human. And that's a far, far lower bar, because most humans also can't predict the decisions of other people or of themselves. Humans often make bad decisions, even in the most important decisions of life. What to study, where to work, whom to marry. People sometimes make a decision, and 10 years later, oh, this was the greatest mistake of my life. So for authority to shift from humans to algorithms, you do not need perfection. You just need the algorithm to be somewhat better. So the bank doesn't expect that the banking algorithm will be perfect, never make any mistake about who to give a loan to. It just needs to be a little better than the human banker. If the human banker makes 23% mistakes and the algorithm makes 17% mistakes, we go for the algorithm. Mm-hmm. And it will be like that in more and more areas. Again, even in personal decisions, like you want to decide what to study in the university, people will increasingly rely on the recommendations of algorithms. And over time, we'll lose the ability to make decisions by themselves. And we really don't have, I would say, the philosophical and spiritual model for such a human life. We are really facing a kind of philosophical bankruptcy, because for most of history, most philosophies and most religions and most spiritual traditions viewed human life as a kind of drama of decision-making. That the climax of life is like a journey, and every now and then you reach an intersection and you need to decide. And whether it's works of art, like a Shakespeare play or a Hollywood comedy, it's usually about these big decisions, to be or not to be, to marry X or to marry Y. And even religions also, they tend to see human life as a drama of decision-making. You make the right decisions, you go to heaven. You make the wrong decisions, you go to hell. What happens when more and more of these decisions are taken by an algorithm? We don't have the artistic, the philosophical, the spiritual models for understanding such a human life. Just think about your favorite Shakespeare play or your favorite Hollywood comedy, and try to imagine that the key decisions in the plot are taken by the Google algorithm. Whenever the hero or heroine reaches a critical point, okay, Google, what should I do? And learned by experience that it's a good idea to do what Google says. It could be a good idea, but we really don't even have the kind of model to understand what kind of life is that.
But I wonder how much that detaches us from nature, because I think this vision is powerful, but somehow it implies ignoring that we live in a cosmos, and sometimes nature revolts against us. And I think, for instance, global warming is an example of that. Global warming, in my view, is not a case of human beings interfering with the environment. It's actually the environment showing human beings how supreme it is over us. So my question is, this might be a sort of blindness to the human condition and the place that we actually occupy in the cosmos, which is completely small and maybe irrelevant. So we might be blinding ourselves, don't you think?
Before Hariri answers, I just want to say that our time, unfortunately, for our conversation, you can answer that question, of course, and then Tiago Lacerda, before we go on, has, I'm going to say a few words about that. We are going to open for public the questions, how it's going to work.
Okay, so very briefly, I would just say that ideally, a potential something positive about the algorithms is that if you program them correctly, they will take into account also the environment and the animals and the trees. And there is a lot of thinking that one of the ways to deal with the ecological crisis will be by relying on these huge AI systems that can save a lot of energy and food and have a much better understanding of the impact that we have. Again, because humans, we have our limitations and our biases, and it's very difficult to change the human mind in this way. But algorithms can be designed to take a much greater number of factors into account.
Very good, very good.
Tiago.
Bom, agora a gente vai abrir para algumas perguntas da plateia.
Nós temos pessoas na plateia com microfone para pegar as perguntas. Eu queria só pedir que as pessoas fizessem, como a gente não tem muito tempo, a gente vai tentar pegar 2, 3 perguntas juntas para ele poder responder, para a gente poder pegar perguntas de mais pessoas.
Para a gente conseguir oferecer mais oportunidade de perguntas, a gente vai tentar sintetizar algumas, né, Adriana?
Isso.
E só lembrando, pergunta é aquela frase curta que termina em tom ascendente e tem um ponto de interrogação no final.
Objetivamente, para a gente ganhar um pouco de
tempo. Para dar oportunidade também de mais gente fazer perguntas, que a gente está com o teatro cheio.
A gente já tem o microfone posicionado lá, Bruna? Júlio? Aqui atrás, por favor, da plateia. Seu nome?
Jaime Weisman.
Por favor, Jaime.
A minha pergunta é a seguinte: no livro Sapiens, o professor Yuval chama a revolução agrícola de armadilha que a espécie humana sofreu. Eu quero perguntar se a revolução da Big Data e dos algoritmos é outra armadilha que a força individual do ser humano está sofrendo e que pode comprometer a sobrevivência da espécie.
Vou só pedir para a gente pegar mais 2 perguntas, ele pode responder juntas.
Aqui,
No balcão.
aqui no alto. Aqui no balcão nobre aqui, ó. Aqui, lá, aqui atrás.
Lá em cima, lá
Aqui,
atrás.
ó, aqui.
Aí, te achei. No show do YouTube.
Boa noite.
Boa noite. Qual o seu nome, amigo?
Meu nome é André Stein. Boa noite.
Boa noite.
Shalom. Eu gostaria... a gente fala muito sobre máquinas substituindo seres humanos. O professor Harari falou recentemente que enfermeiras serão mais difíceis de serem substituídas do que os médicos. E eu, como pai de uma estudante de psicologia, gostaria de saber como ele vê o papel do psicólogo nessa caminhada louca que a gente tem aí pela frente.
E acho que uma última pergunta.
Lá, ó. Aí. Pode levantar isso, por favor, amigo. Seu
Boa
nome.
noite.
Boa noite.
Boa noite, boa noite. Aqui no balcão, aqui em cima. Aqui, ó.
Muito
Bom,
bem.
tentarei ser sucinto, assim.
Qual o seu nome, por favor?
Luciano.
Luciano. Boa noite, meu irmão.
Boa noite. Nos 2 séculos passados, a gente passou por um período de revoluções devido à situação do capitalismo, né, no momento. E como é que se vê no futuro, como é que o professor vê no futuro, se o senhor, a gente pinta um cenário de extrema acumulação em um capitalismo vigiado e, ao mesmo tempo, um mundo totalmente demográfico. Também teremos revoluções populares, sociais, ou esse capitalismo vigiado, a tecnologia, irá inibir esse tipo de movimento? Obrigado.
Okay, so I'll first answer the first and third questions together because they are connected. Yeah, the danger is that, like in the agricultural revolution, the enormous power of the new revolution will benefit just a small percentage of humanity. It happened with the agricultural revolution, that it gave humans enormous new powers, but these powers were usually monopolized by a very small elite of kings and emperors and aristocrats and priests, and the average person actually had a worse life after the agricultural revolution than before. And we need to be very aware that this could happen again with the new revolution, but it's not inevitable. It depends, again, on the decisions, on the policies that we adopt in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we need, the most important thing is, I mean, it goes without question, it's certain that the new technologies will create enormous new wealth and power. If this wealth and power is distributed, I won't say completely equally, that's impossible, but is distributed relatively equally between all countries and all people, so nobody is left behind completely, then it will be a wonderful thing for humanity. The danger is that, as happened before in history, it will be monopolized by just 2, 3, 4 countries or by a very small class, and then it could be disastrous. And it's up to you, really, by the decisions you take as individuals and as collectives to prevent this. The second question was about psychology and its role, and it has an extremely important role. Because again, one of the main difficulties in dealing with all these changes will be psychological. If we're thinking, for example, about the job market, so many jobs that people have today will disappear, but there will be new jobs. It's very unlikely that we'll see just the disappearance of jobs. There will be jobs. The problem will be that people will have to constantly retrain and reinvent themselves because the jobs will keep changing. It's not like you learn something in your teens and 20s and then work for your whole life in this profession as it is. No, you have to keep learning and changing and reinventing yourself. And the problem there is partly financial. Who is going to support you during the transition period and to finance your retraining courses? And ideally, the answer should be that the government raises taxes on the corporations that make huge profits from this technological revolution and uses it to support the people. But the additional problem will be psychological, because change is always stressful, especially usually when you get older and older, you like change less and less. Even when you're in your teens or 20s, change is difficult. But you have no choice. This is your life. Your body is changing. You have to learn so many new things. As you get older, and you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, people usually don't like change so much. But in the 21st century, they'll have no choice. You have to keep changing, or you will become irrelevant. And the levels of stress that this will create will be enormous. So we will need a lot of help psychologically to deal with this fluid and stressful world.
So probably psychologists will be good in the next area.
Again, I mean, it could be that it won't be human psychologists. It could be a combination. Again, I mean, the AI it won't have emotions of its own. But AI will become better and better in identifying human emotions, identifying not just sadness or joy, but also the onset of depression, dangerous levels of stress. And this can impact so many different industries. To give one example, let's say you're an investment banker, and in 20 or 30 years, maybe you put a helmet, you go to work, you put a helmet on your head which monitors your brain, and when the computer recognizes that you have entered a dangerous mental state, dangerous for the bank. I mean, you're starting to make rash decisions. You're betting millions of dollars because you're overconfident. Then the computer, there is a red light, stop. So you don't need a human next to you to tell you, hey, you have entered the dangerous zone when you're overconfident and rash. A computer will be able to tell you that. So again, I don't think that human psychologists will completely disappear. But they too will have to change, because many of the things they do, computers will be able to do better. So the psychologists will need to learn how to work with these new devices to provide better mental health care for people.
And Yuval, just very quickly, I'd like to remind people that you meditate 2 hours a day, right? What is your experience with meditation in view of all this?
I do Vipassana meditation. I meditate, as you said, 2 hours a day. I go every year for a long retreat of like 30 or 60 days. And I find that it's very helpful for me, not only in dealing with stress and finding more peace of mind, but especially in getting to know myself better, understand what's really happening inside me, inside my mind, which is, I think, extremely important, especially today, because, you know, for all of history, you had all these wise people and saints, you had Socrates and Jesus and Buddha telling people to get to know themselves better. But previously, you didn't have competition. If you said, I don't have the time to get to know myself, I'm too busy shepherding the goats or something, nobody could hack your brain. Now you have real competition. Now you have these corporations and governments trying to hack you. So it's very important to get to know yourself better than they know you, so you can still have some control of your life. And I find that for me, meditation is an excellent tool. Different things work better for different people. Other different spiritual traditions, there is psychological therapy, there is art. Whatever works for you is good, but it's important to invest in it, time and energy, because you don't have a lot of time, you are in this competition.
Vamos pegar mais algumas perguntas da plateia?
Mais uma, a gente tem uma pergunta no balcão, no camarote. Por favor, amigo.
Up here on your left, second floor. So, Professor Harari, it's an honor. My question is about, all right, we spoke about...
Foi mal. Sorry.
All right, I heard a lot about algorithms, and I'm not really sure how many people actually understand what an algorithm is. And it's safe to say that in a place like Brazil, that percentage is probably small. And with the premise that our information is going to be collected, we're going to go to the hospital, it's going to be a machine that's going to diagnose us, and this brings a crisis as in fear. People don't really know what to trust and how to trust. It seems to me that the way to fight it is, what to fight is actually the reasons why we trust or we don't trust. And the only way I see it, and I ask this from a teacher to a teacher, how important it is to teach people to understand how we know what we know, as giving them the right basis for trusting information that needs to be trusted. And trusting for the right reasons, that's what I mean. What do you think is the importance of teaching that specifically? Thank you.
Pegamos mais duas perguntas para a gente juntar.
Tem uma pergunta aqui no camarote. Seu Lúcio, por favor.
Alô, na sua perspectiva, qual a relação entre humanismo e política e o que esperar da política e da democracia no próximo século?
E uma terceira, na galeria.
Galeria! Galeria aqui.
Alô?
Hello.
Oi.
Hello. Oi. Sorry.
Aqui em cima, Leandro.
Hello. My name is Sandra. This question is in English, please. You talk about how we are surrounded by AI and data collection systems. The easiest to identify would be social media. My question to you is, what's your personal relationship, for instance, with social media? Do you use it? Do you feed it the wrong information? Do you get away from social media? And also, if you were to do a fourth book, would you please consider doing the audiobook with your own voice? Because I think it's important to get to know you better. Thank you.
So I'll try to answer one by one. An algorithm basically is like a recipe for doing something. Do this, and then do that, and then do that, and then do that. So it can be for a soup, how to make vegetable soup. You first cut the onion, then put this, then put this. So this is also a kind of algorithm. Of course, the Google algorithm is far, far more complicated. But in a very, very short way, an algorithm is really a list of do this, do this, do this, do this. And that way you solve problems or you answer questions. What was the second?
The relationship between humanism and politics.
No, before that, there was that was just a comment about the algorithm.
If we should, from what I understood, we should teach.
Yes, this is very important, that we need to teach everybody, people in school and also adults, not just pieces of information, but how to know which information to trust and which not to trust. Because now that the big issue is not information, we are flooded with enormous amounts of information. In past eras, information was scarce, so one of the main jobs of teachers was to provide this scarce resource of information. Now it's completely the opposite. People are flooded by enormous amounts of information. The last thing they need is more information. What they need is the ability to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable sources of information.
This is so important.
So I think that this should also be very, very central in schools. That you don't, I don't know, you teach history, you don't need to teach the students which king ruled in which year and which battle took place when. If they want to know that, they can just Google it. What they need is to tell the difference between the reliable stories and the unreliable and how to do it. That's very complicated, but it's really a matter of survival. Otherwise, it's so easy to manipulate you, and that connects to the second question about democracy and humanism. Democracy cannot survive in a situation when people can't tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information. Because democracy is based on having reasonable public discussions. If trust collapses, if you can't trust the other people, the other parties in the country, then you can't have a democracy. A dictatorship can function without trust. A civil war can happen without trust, but not a democracy. The key thing about a democracy is that you trust even your political rivals enough that you are willing to accept the verdict of the elections. That a democracy can function if you think that your political rivals are wrong or even stupid, but not if you hate them and they hate you. Then a democracy can survive just for a few years. And so I hope that, again, humanist values are the basis for this kind of trust. And this also goes back to the question of nationalism and the importance of fostering trust and compassion towards all the people in the country. Otherwise, the democratic system collapses, at least in the long term. The third question
was about how you relate it to social media use.
Yes, that's also very, very important. Again, as I gave in the example of the dating application, I'm not against social media. I think it's very important to connect people in a new way. It gives voice to many people and many communities that previously had no voice. I mean, some people, kind of the myth, the good old 1950s or 1960s, when there was just, 3 newspapers and 1 TV channel, and so we didn't have to deal with all these things, but a lot of people had absolutely no access to these few channels of communication. So social media is important and is positive by giving more people an ability to voice their concerns, their interests. I use social media to some extent. Again, the key is to use technology for your purposes and not being used by it. To use your Facebook account, not to be used by your Facebook account. And here, education. So education has a very important role because it's not something we can assume that people will just know by themselves. So it's very important, for example, in schools, to teach young people how to use social media wisely in a way that benefits them and not harms them. Of course, for that, the teachers would need to understand also social media, and that's part of the issue of the 21st century, that we are encountering more and more completely new situations because of the new technology, that the adults have a difficulty understanding and guiding. Previously in history, there were changes, but usually they were slow enough that the adults had wisdom to explain to the younger generation how to deal with these issues. Now it's the opposite, that in many of the problems we encounter, 10-year-olds understand social media sometimes much better than their parents. So how can they get guidance from their parents about how to use social media? And I don't have the magic solution, And probably more responsibility will have to be on the younger generation, simply because they understand many of these things better. But we can't just throw the problem on them. So again, this goes also back to the question of psychology, that adults will need to learn new stuff in order to guide the younger generation. And they can't just rely on their previous experience, but it's extremely important. Again, and connecting it also to the democracy issue, social media at present often undermines democracy.
Right. It's where fake news is spreading.
Exactly, because as we mentioned earlier, there is this competition for human attention. The easiest way to grab human attention in social media or in any media is to press the emotional buttons of fear and hate and anger, and then there is more and more fear and hate and anger, and then public discourse collapses, public trust collapses, and democracy collapses. Now, when you look at the problems we face today, they are not necessarily more difficult than 40 years ago or 80 years ago. But social media makes it very difficult to maintain a reasonable public discourse, again, in which people can disagree, but they don't hate each other. They don't think the other side is the devil. And social media has this tendency to go to the extremes because everybody's competing for attention, and the easiest way to grab attention is by these stories that enhance fear, true or fake. They enhance fear and hate. There are many things we can try to do about it. One thing, again, we can try to use technology to help us deal with technology. So one idea is to develop a kind of biofeedback, that a kind of antivirus for the mind that alerts you when somebody is trying to manipulate your weaknesses. There is an AI system that gets to know your own weaknesses and alerts you whenever somebody is trying to exploit that. It gets to know that you already have a bias against immigrants, or you already have a bias against religious people. So whenever there is a fake news story about religious people, then it warns you, hey, you have a weakness there. You tend to think they are all stupid, you will believe anything, be careful. Or a different way of doing it is, and this goes with the biometric sensors, is actually showing you what's happening to your brain right now. Like you're watching YouTube videos or your Facebook feed or your Instagram or whatever, and there is a small, at the top of the screen, there is, look what's happening to your level of hatred as you are watching these videos. Just so you know, we are not blocking it, it's not censorship, but you should be aware that you're sitting here for the last 2 hours feeding your hatred. This is what you're doing. You are having a feast of hatred. And hopefully when people see directly what's happening to their brain, they will at least be able to make more wiser choices.
Mais uma, Adriana. A última pergunta. Uma última pergunta. Tinha uma moça ali atrás bem afim de fazer uma pergunta. Levanta, levanta. Ó, tá com o microfone já? Ah, então, por favor. Seu nome. Qual? Desculpa. Liga o microfone dela, por favor.
Lízia.
Lízia.
We tend to be pessimists about the government and how things are getting worse. But reading your book, you mentioned when we evolved to be sapiens, we killed basically all of the big animals of Australia, so we are naturally cruel, I guess. And I felt a little optimistic. I think we are evolving as a species. I feel like globalization is doing us good. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like humanity is improving? Do you think like we can chill, maybe?
A gente tem tempo para pegar mais
Essa
duas
é a
para
última.
juntar? É a
Acho que
última.
essa é a última. Obrigado.
That's the last one.
That's the last one.
Okay, so an optimistic note for the end. I think we need to be realist, not to fall either for kind of naive utopias about the future, but also not to become overly pessimistic, because then people also tend to have these nostalgic fantasies about the past, that, oh, the future is terrible, we need somehow to go back to the past. And that's impossible. You can't go back to the past. And the key thing which I try to emphasize also in many of the previous questions is that it really depends on the decisions that we make. That technology is not deterministic. I mean, one thing is deterministic, which is change. The world is going to change tremendously in the coming century. We can't stop that. The economy, the political system, the society, everything is going to change. But what change exactly, that still depends on us. We can use the same technology to create very different kinds of political and social systems. This was always true also in the past. In the 20th century, people used the same technology to create fascist dictatorships and liberal democracies. They both used the same technology. So it's the same in the 21st century. AI, biotechnology will certainly change the world, but we can use them basically to create heaven or hell and a lot of things in between. And it's the responsibility of all of us to make the right decisions. And I would say that the key is also, going back to the first questions about storytelling and cooperation, you can't do it by yourself. You need to organize with other people. So 50 people who are working together as members of an organization can accomplish far, far more than 500 isolated individuals. So whatever cause seems to you the most important or that you can contribute most, then join an organization this week, this month, to do something about it. It should be active and you should be organized. And maybe to give an example like with climate change, so by yourself you can't do much. There are people who say, oh, you need to reduce consumption of this, or you need to stop using cars or whatever. The key is not on the individual level, it's on the collective level. We need regulations, and for that we need organizations and political parties and pressure groups. So it should come from there. Of course, underneath that, there are individuals. So we need to get to know ourselves better and to change what's happening in our own minds. But ultimately, to make a change in the outside world, we need to organize. So I would end with this message that don't be too optimistic or too pessimistic, but be realist. Remember that it's still up to you. Nobody knows what the world in 2050 would be like because it's not determined. It depends on what you decide. And to make a real change, you can't do it by yourself. You need to organize with other people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Adriana, Ronaldo. Mr. Harari, thank you for the evening. Em nome da direção, da equipe da LER, dos patrocinadores, apoiadores e parceiros do evento, muito obrigado, muito boa noite a todos. Nos vemos na LER de 20 a 24 de novembro. Boa noite.